name is Gabrielle Pullen, and I've been doing Feldenkrais since 2004, actually before that, but there's something strange about Feldenkrais. It's sort of like people get attracted to it, and they only actually really do it when they're completely ready. And so I studied and read a lot of stuff for 10 years before I took the leap. And then it's a 4-year training, so it's a big commitment. Yeah. So I graduated in 2004 and have been doing it since. And I got into it because I was working as a professional massage therapist for 7 years or more. And it's about the 7-year mark when people realize I can't do this forever. I need to start to learn how to take better care of myself, because if you're working full time, it's a huge amount of physical stress on your body, as well as you have to learn how to not take on other people's stress.
Right.
And Feldenkrais was a really good way to learn how to do self-care, because I could just lie on the floor and roll around slowly with awareness and feel better afterwards. And so it was quite magical. And I would say that it definitely adds to any yoga practice. So that said, do you have any questions before we start? Because I know, like, I generally don't do the Q&A afterwards, because by the time we're done, people are usually sort of like, oh yeah, I feel so good, and they can't quite articulate what they're feeling. So any questions?
Well, I'm just curious about what it's all about, because I have never done it, like I said, and I don't even think I've watched any videos, so I just know it's a real body thing. So
yeah, well, so I'm going to do about maybe 5-10 minutes of just setting context and giving you a little sense of what it's about. And then I will start the movement lesson, which is different from yoga in the sense that it's never demonstrated. So it's a verbally guided instruction, and there are constraints, and you're given an opportunity to learn from your own experience. And it's a way of working with yourself. The reason we work lying down, and we start usually most lessons, I mean, there are thousands of lessons for every conceivable part of the body, but mostly we start lying down because, number one, you can do a body scan, as people do in yoga, which helps improve interoception, which is the ability to use our own proprioceptive nerve endings and really sense where we are in space and connect deeply with the physical body, which we tend to disassociate with in normal modern life, right? It's not like when people were working the land, for a living. They lived in their bodies much, much more than we do. So it's even more vital now than it ever was before, also considering what's going on, which is meaning that everybody's sort of freaked out. And I have another video that you can watch on the polyvagal system, which explains a little bit about how there's some new understandings about the nervous system, and Feldenkrais is one of the best ways to soothe the agitation that happens when we're super stressed out. And so that's another piece of it. And then the other thing I want to point out before I go to the images is that one of the reasons that we work lying down is because you want to be able to calm the nervous system so that it can perceive more. And when you're lying on the floor, there's no fear of falling, right? And your postural muscles don't have to be engaged. So 90% of the time when we're upright, some part of our autonomic nervous system is engaging the muscles that keep us upright. And so when you get rid of that extra activity and you're just completely lying down without any need to support yourself in space, then you can perceive more. And this is about refining perception, both emotionally, mentally, I would argue spiritually as well, but it uses the physical body as a concrete metaphor for understanding those other realms. So that said, I'm going to share my screen. The first time I did this live on Zoom was, that Monday when we sort of all found out that, we were supposed to do this thing they call social distancing, which is so ineptly named. It should be, I think, physical distancing, because we need each other more than ever. but this was kind of what I really spent the first session on the most, was this idea that there are these principles that guide every single lesson. So and they're actually also really good principles to live by. Mm-hmm. So in every lesson, I just want to invite you to move slowly, to pace yourself. And the process gives you rests. One of the least understood mechanisms of learning in higher education even is that we need to have little breaks to sort of process information. Like their method, I don't know if you've ever spent time in a university setting, is they throw as much spaghetti at the wall as they can, and they just let whatever sticks, they sort of let it, they let that ride, not realizing that, if we, in composition studies now, they're starting to realize that if they connect the information to a person's experience and they give them time to sort of process their own thoughts in writing, using words on paper as a feedback loop, in the same way that the nervous system is a feedback loop. They've done lots of studies there to demonstrate that processing is a huge piece. Are you a writer at all?
No, I think when I was younger, I think, or like when I was in college, I used to write and think that,
Do you like to read? Are you?
I'm a big reader, yes.
So if you've listened, there's some amazing interviews of authors on BBC World Book Club, really well done, from all over the world, all people who've done amazing work, translated into a zillion different languages. And bar none, when I was listening to those, so many of those interviews, writers will say, I write to know what I think. I write to understand my world. I write to make sense of what's going on. So you can see it's a feedback loop.
Right. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And then, so the other principles, just briefly, amplify. So what they say where energy flows, where attention goes, is what they say, right? So when what you focus on is amplified. So the world is currently compulsively focused on problems, which it kind of tends to amplify this idea that we got to go out, wrestle it to the ground and kill it. When in fact, if you focus on solutions, you can make the solutions expand. And the fifth one, observe, be playful, be teachable. And that brings us to a state change on some level. A state change meaning out of monkey mind, out of the everyday alpha beta brainwave state of being hetzed and in a hurry and having too much to do, into the playful state that children up to the age of 4 live in a theta brainwave state, which means they soak up things and they see things that often people just do not see. There's a story of I don't know, there's this story of a truck that got stuck underneath a bridge, and there were firefighters and emergency people, and they couldn't figure out how to get this truck out from underneath this bridge because it just wouldn't move. And the story goes that this guy was walking by with a 5-year-old kid, and the 5-year-old kid said, why don't they just let the tires, like the air out of the tires? Which they then did, and the whole truck lowered and they were able to roll it out, So he was in a state where he could see possibilities that people who were in a state of hyper arousal and trauma, they couldn't see it, right? So there's something going on about this process that helps us change to a calmer state. And then 6, respect yourself, respect your own limitations. And I don't think we hear that enough in our society. Rather than bogarting through pain, less is more. So we do many repetitions so that you can sense the neural pathway, but stop whenever you're ready, whenever you feel like I could use a little break, and go only to your limit and then back off from it. So don't go all the way. So it's different from yoga in that regard, right? You're not trying to stretch at all. you're gently expanding your possibilities by exploration, by gradually increasing the range, by being a little bit curious about like what would happen if I did this. So it's kind of like an experiment in which you're both the observer and the observed. And 7 is expand, make your moves gradually larger. So then that takes me to the other image. So when I talk about the path of least resistance, what I'm talking about actually is what's catching my attention right now in the world. And that is that some of the things that we do habitually, we do because we have habits. So in our normal everyday life, we get to do what we have to do. And some of it we do out of habit, and that makes it easier. However, some of the habits we have are compulsive. And the reason that's coming to my attention, I think, is because so many people are not able to do what their habit is, and they're having a really hard time with it because they're resisting, or they're just, it's taking them a while to see, like, what could I do that's different than what I usually do? And so the question that we need to ask ourselves is the path of least resistance a habit that's useful? Or is the path of least resistance just us following a neural pathway that has become a compulsion that we do just because we haven't thought about it in years? And does it really serve us? And that's what any lesson allows us to explore in a kind of a metaphorical way with movement. So in neuroscience, they say how we adapt. They say neurons that fire together wire together. And I was, in the last year, I've done a study of the program at the University of Pennsylvania runs a master's degree in resilience training, which costs like $34,000 a semester, right? So it's a little expensive, and there are things you can do at home that that might be less intellectual. But one of the things that they've said is that they've defined resilience as the ability to adapt. And coincidentally, or not, Feldenkrais defined his definition of health was the ability to adapt. Mm-hmm. And so here, I love this image of, this is like neurons firing and how they connect, right? You can see the way they're connected to each other, and they're like fireflies, right? They're just so beautiful. And so here's kind of what I was just talking about. Are we doing things out of habit or out of compulsion? Mm-hmm. And so when we're thrown out of our habitual situation, it can be especially difficult if we resist adapting. So these lessons are about finding new ways to organize how we respond so that we're ready to move in any direction at any moment. Hence, it's about cultivating the ability to adapt, to be ready, and to be free. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that Feldenkrais came upon this was that he was a black belt in judo. So he was interested in judo. You need to be ready to move in any of the 6 cardinal directions at any time, like an athlete, right? That makes you more safe. It makes you more stable in the field of gravity. And so what we're doing is providing a concrete means that is easy to learn, that helps relax the nervous system and calm the mind, that helps map more of the brain. And so in neuroscience, with all these new tools that they have, what they've discovered is that they're learning, which part of the brain corresponds to different proprioceptive systems, different senses, and how the brain is folded into these multiple layers to increase the surface area so that allows for more neural connections. And of course, it's incredibly complex. It just creates a larger surface area, somewhat like the intestines, right? They're folded in and out and over and under each other, right? To make a huge, long area much smaller. And to make sense of this structure, the neuroscientists are talking about brain mapping. And so one of the most fascinating discoveries in modern neuroscience is that our conscious experience is created by patterns of brain activity, and these patterns are often called maps. And so every thought, every emotion, every intention is the product of the brain's physical state. And someone could open your head and stimulate the pattern of brain activity associated with eating chocolate, for example, or getting stung by a bee, or moving a finger. And you would experience those events as if they were really happening. So when you consciously perceive the position or the movement of a particular body part, there's a particular pattern of brain activity that creates perception. And so when we do awareness through movement lessons, it's all about learning new ways, learning to think outside the box, make new neural pathways, new connections, so that you have new options and you're mapping out a larger area of the brain, which means that you're more adaptable, and that if things change, you can shift the map. And this neuroplasticity is available to us until the day we die. It's not set in stone. So Feldenkrais is a way to learn how to work with that on your own. So that said, the first week we talked about, principles to live by. The second week we talked about the resting length of muscles and how the nervous system resets them when we do this process. And the third week we talked about the posture of defeat versus the posture of support through the skeleton. And so today, let's dive right into what is this? How do we create a path of least resistance by creating new neural pathways, new habits that serve us, so that because the point is that if we're functioning out of compulsion, out of fear, out of resistance, we are going down the path of least resistance, but it's not a path that serves us. Mm-hmm. So if we're deliberate about it, we can create a path of least resistance by creating new habits that do serve us. All right, so my 4 favorite words in the English language: lie down on your back. And so if you would, lie on your back with your arms and legs long, and simply allow your mind to notice how you're resting on the floor. So we use the floor as a way to reflect back many things, one of which is maybe the floor is reflecting the position that you sleep in. For myself, when I lay on the floor today, I noticed, I was sleeping on that side. And as you're lying on the floor, if you notice, is your chin closer to one shoulder than the other? Is your face perhaps facing more to one side of your body than the other, even though when you initially lay down, you didn't really think about it and you thought your head was just in the middle? But perhaps there is less distance between your shoulder and your chin on one side. Maybe your shoulder is more forward in space. Maybe you sense the distance between your hip and your shoulder on one side is shorter than on the opposite side. So just noticing any asymmetries that come to your attention when you really sit down to do a scan and let your body relax into the floor. Notice if there's a difference in the way that your left leg and knee and foot is facing compared to your right knee and foot. So that's representative of any difference in tonus in the right hip versus the left hip. What else might the floor reflect? Does it reflect in any way how you sit when you're sitting at a desk working for a while? Or might it reflect, these are questions for you to just think about, ponder in the privacy of your own mind and notice. We'll come back to these at the end and see if anything has changed. Notice, does it reflect how many hours you spend in a car or maybe gardening? Are there any clear asymmetries that are not necessarily discrepancies in leg length, but discrepancies in the way you move that are self-evident when you stop and actually be still and rest in a symmetrical position that you actually notice is not quite as symmetrical as you thought. So we're looking for functional symmetry, so that our reflexes are equally good on both sides. Again, the idea is to be more comfortable, more safe in space. And just take another moment as you lie there to breathe. Notice your breathing. Notice, could you exhale and exhale until you've rid yourself of all air in your lungs, and then just wait for a moment until your body spontaneously inhales, so that you come to trust that your nervous system has your back and it takes care of so many things. We always, are we compulsively micromanaging reality is really the background question. So when you're ready, if you would, could you bend your right knee so that you slide your right foot towards your sit bones and stand your right foot so that your knee is up in the air? And notice that you could push slightly through your foot in this position, and that you could rock your pelvis a little bit so that the right side of your hip, your right side of your pelvis comes a little bit up towards the ceiling ever so slightly. So try that a couple times just to notice how does that force move through you? Does it move straight up through your head, or does it move in a diagonal pattern across your opposite shoulder? And just make two or three small lifting, pushing through the foot just to sense that. And then between each one, really just let yourself rest without effort so that you make a clear distinction. And then if you would, raise both arms up towards the ceiling and bend your right elbow so that your right hand comes underneath your left armpit and rest it there, and your left hand comes down and rests on your right shoulder. So it's kind of like this self-hugging position where your right arm is in the area underneath your left shoulder and your right hand is on your your left hand is on your right shoulder. And very gently push through your foot as if you wanted to slide your right hand towards the floor and then back to this sort of neutral position on your back. So you're on your back, and then you push through your foot and you reach for the floor with your right hand to the left of yourself. And reach as far as you can go until you can really feel your hand flat on the floor, and then allow your body to come back onto your back. And do this many times at your own pace, noticing if you could become softer in your ribs. Could you become softer in your neck or your head? Is there anywhere that you could spread the effort through more of yourself? Notice if you can do this without bracing anywhere in your jaw, so that you're learning to expand your awareness to include the ability to breathe easily when you do something unfamiliar. A lot of people hold their breath when they do something unusual. And then notice how you participate with the floor as you breathe. And invite yourself to find the answers within yourself that expand your awareness. What do you do with your eyes? You take your eyes with your hand, or which hand do you take your eyes with? There's some very interesting, intricate organization about the eyes and the neck. And then let it all go and rest on your back. Let your arms rest on the floor. Let your leg go down. And notice that as you rest, there's sort of a trail of what you've just done in your awareness. Some parts of you may feel like they've been moving. Like, so how do we learn? What's the basis of learning? We remember what we did. And in many cases, in most cases, it's actually a sensory memory. I mean, we have to move our eyes to read. We move our eyes in a very specific patterned way to count. So the basis for most cognition is in fact related to movement very deeply. And as we do these movements, sometimes memories are stimulated because the motor cortex is right next to the place where we hold certain memories. So it's all intertwined in that neural map. So when you're ready, please go into the same position, and we're going to do it with some variations. So you're bending your left leg is long. You're just bending your right knee, bringing your right foot to standing, and take both arms up towards the ceiling, and very sort of systematically bend your right elbow and put your right hand underneath your left armpit, and bend your left elbow so that you have your left hand on top of your right shoulder. And again, start reaching for the floor. This is like known affectionately as the self-hugging lesson, because I'm feeling like people need to be a little bit more compassionate with themselves right now. Start rolling towards your left, reaching with your right hand. And could you do this without pushing through your leg, without pushing through your foot? So you're doing the same movement, but you're initiating it from your center, from your core, from some other part of yourself. So you're spreading the effort throughout a larger part of yourself. Could you feel like you're moving and reaching and touching the floor with the flat of your hand with no pressure through your leg or foot? How do you use your pelvis to do this? How do you use the rotation that's available in your spine to do this? How do you use the muscles of your core and your ribs? How do you organize yourself to make it light and easy? Notice if it's easier to go when you're inhaling, or is it easier to go when you're exhaling? So there's an innate recognition of what feels congruent. Let that be your guide. Cultivate the ability to trust yourself, and to know that there's some part of you that has this innate intelligence that has, I mean, where does pattern recognition come from? How is it that babies can recognize their mothers within moments of being able to use their eyes? Like, there are parts of the nervous system that are so amazing and magnificent, and we just don't even really inhabit our bodies that way, the way that animals do, the way that animals trust that they will land on their feet, that they can trust themselves. I guess, in the last few hundred years, we've come to make the mind and information, which is sort of being in our face right now. It's so clear that information is irrelevant unless it's the right information unless it's related to what's going on, right? So information is not king. It's the sense we make of our perceptions and our reality. And as you start to, if you can maybe take a rest, just be still for a moment before we go into the next variations. So we're stripping the underlying premises and beliefs that we have away. You know, we're stripping away the underlying assumptions we make about how we move in space in the to the service of finding easier ways, softer ways, safer, more stable ways, and to the service of being able to connect with the experience of the skeleton, which is there to provide support for us in space so that the muscles are free to move. And we talked a little bit more about that last week. So one last time, if you would, bend your right knee, stand your right foot, and go into this same position with the, notice that the right hand is crossing to the opposite side, right underneath the arm, and the left hand is crossing to the opposite side over the right shoulder. And that this in and of itself would be a huge challenge for somebody with a brain injury, because you know you're crossing, you're moving opposite the direction that you're usually using your right side for. So if you could initiate the movement with your eyes, initiate the movement by turning your head, and then allow it to flow from your head down through your torso so that your head and your eyes initiate the movement, and your torso reaches, and you're actually reaching even further now through the torso, and the foot is actually the last thing that you may feel pressure from. And as you come back onto your back, you pause, and then you go into it again. And each time, now reach even further. Could you reach so far with your right hand that you're almost completely on your left side, and some part of your forearm is actually on the floor, and you're just rolling almost to your right side, and then back onto your back. And notice where it's smooth. And notice if you can reverse the movement with the same control and speed that you went into it with. So you're not using control in the sense of micromanaging everything in the environment or within ourselves, which is so much of our programming, but you're using control in the sense of an athlete who can make things happen with rhythm. There's a relationship between rhythm and music, between rhythm and dance, between rhythm and learning, between rhythm and numbers. And again, we're back to cognition. And just notice if there are places where it actually feels delicious, so that you start to honor your body's innate feedback. You know, our bodies are telling us, you know, most of us have been programmed that we have to sit still. You know, when we're 4, 5, 6 years old, we start to get this programming to sit still. Then we have to go to school, and we really have to sit still. And then we have to go to work, and then we have to not only sit still, we got to go do things that perhaps we're not so enthusiastic about doing. So there's huge cultural programming to dishonor the body, to dishonor our own perceptions about what we'd like to do. And so rather than waiting for the few hours we have at night, rather than waiting for the few hours we have when we're on having a weekend, rather than waiting for vacation, which may or may not come once a year, what if we decided to honor this body that we live in and its desires to rest and to process and to do things? It's not like we don't like to work. Working is good, exercise is good, but just not full on, full out until we drop. That's not so good. And then as you're doing this movement, could you take your eyes So let's say you're on your left side and just hang out there for a moment and then allow your eyes to go to the floor to your left. And then as you come back onto your back, allow your eyes to follow the movement. And then as you go back into the movement toward your left side, reaching through your left hand, allow your eyes to go towards the ceiling. So that, in other words, your eyes are going in the opposite direction, but be gentle with your range of motion there because it's much smaller. And then switch that so that your eyes are leading the movement. And notice how much freer you feel in your shoulders and in your neck when your eyes are actually going with the movement. And then just test that out a little bit and then rest on your back. Give it a complete rest. Notice how good it feels to just be still. If you feel anywhere that there are parts of your body that are maybe sort of almost vibrating, or it's when you rest that you can notice if you've been working too hard. And set an intention the next round to do less with that part of yourself and expand the movement, and so that you're using some other part of yourself, maybe some less familiar part of yourself. So thinking about this idea that when you move your little finger, the area in your brain that receives sensory information from the finger is activated. So when we're working very deliberately with one side at a time. And yet this is a unique lesson in that, we don't always cross the midline, which requires that the corpus callosum connect the two sides of the brain in a way that's actually a very advanced form of development that, if we don't have it, we're unable to tell left from right, basically, for one thing, among others. So as you rest, notice any difference you feel along the entire right side of yourself compared to the entire left side of yourself, based on the fact that we've been doing a one-sided movement. Just to prove to yourself that the traces of what we do in a day, what we do in a day, the activities, the movements, the way we use our brain, the way we use our eyes, all of that leaves traces in the nervous system that are perceptible. And when we do movements very slowly with awareness, you can make changes to change that into something that feels better very much more quickly. Like you would have to do the same activity for hours without paying attention for it to even be perceptible as a problem. But by that time, it's usually too late. And for that reason alone, this process of awareness through movement teaches people how to notice things before they become injuries. And notice also that there's some part of your body that's saying, well, let's do the other side. Let's do the other side, right? So the body has an opinion that we just drown out so often. So when you're ready, if you would, think this through before you move. Think about remember what you did on the other side and see if you can figure out what the movements would be so that you're translating them to the opposite side. And the skill of translation is so helpful. Like if there's some area of your life that you're good at, if you can learn to translate it into other areas where you're not feeling as confident or as competent, it's so helpful. It's a really helpful skill. So having given you a little chance to think it through, would you Please bend your left knee and slide your left foot towards your buttocks so that you're not going into the full out biggest part of the movement immediately. We're starting really slowly, just with the first movement, so that you can notice and gradually make changes that stick. Pressing through the left foot with the intention of simply noticing how can you use that ground force through the foot, through the skeleton, through the bone of your calf, the femur of your thigh, into your hip socket to just roll a little, to lift the left side of your pelvis a little. And how does that force translate through the rest of your skeleton? Does it go up into your left shoulder? Probably not so much, right? Does it go up through your head, or does it feel more like as you do that, it can translate diagonally across to the opposite side? And if you think about walking is a bilateral movement, right? So there is this diagonal pattern in walking that when it's not there, yeah, causes some problems. And let that go and just be still for a moment. And when you're ready, could you raise both arms towards the ceiling? And then you're going to do the opposite of what you did last time. So you're going to bend your left elbow so that it comes underneath your right armpit. Bend your right arm and put your right hand on top of your left shoulder and start rolling through the foot gently to reach for the floor on the right side of yourself, just to the point where your left hand, the hand that you're reaching through, comes onto the floor, so that your hand is flat on the floor, and then roll back onto your back. And do this many times, slowly, gradually. And how could you lift your pelvis so that you feel like you're making a lengthening movement through the whole of your torso? How could you lift so that you're lifting, turning sequentially, and your awareness is moving up your spine? Like each of those little vertebrae have these little shark fins on the back, right? So there's one little spinous process on the back of each vertebrae that's like a shark fin. And as you rotate along your spine, each one of them along the entire chain is turning. Can you imagine that? Can you visualize what's going on inside your spine as you move, as you come away from the floor? Can you become interested in the way you use your pelvis, or how to use your eyes and your shoulders in a way that's soft and that makes it easier, so that there's a flow and a path of least resistance, that it actually feels better? And then let that go and take a rest, complete rest on your back. Notice as you rest, even, where do you feel more pressure underneath you? And it's wild to think that, when they do these, they have all these new toys in neuroscience, right? So they can stimulate the brain artificially in the area of the finger, and you would feel like you were being touched on the finger. And that in and of itself is evidence of this idea of, mapping the brain. But the thing that is interesting is that there's a controversy out there. Like, there are people who are concerned that if they start mapping certain things, that science might try to start controlling people. And I don't know that I want to go there, but where I would like to go with this is to really think about the idea that the map is malleable, it's plastic. The neuroplasticity and the adaptability of the brain mean that we can change the map until the day we die. So if we encounter circumstances, situations that are not helpful, not working for us, we can find new ways to work with those situations, to go around them, under them, through them, to find new variations in the same way that we're doing in the lesson. So when you're ready, if you would, come back to the position where your left knee is bent, left foot is standing, left hand is underneath the right armpit, right hand is over the left shoulder. And now could you start rolling in the direction of the right side of yourself to reach until the flat of your hand is on the floor, but without pressing through your leg. How could you do this without ground forces in the foot? And how could you do this using ground forces underneath your pelvis, underneath your ribs? And play with that for a few minutes. So include the whole of yourself in your awareness as you do the movement many times, to engage your ability to pay more attention to your internal environment as you're aware of your external environment. We're so programmed to pay attention to the external environment, the external circumstances, the external expectations of others. Is it true? And is it working for you? Because I don't know about you, but it wasn't working for me. I needed to start paying attention to my own experience so that I could work with people in a way that worked for me and work with situations and life in general in a way that honored what I had to get done, but also that honored my interests, my needs, my perspective, my voice, right? So this is really about self-empowerment on some level. How do you use the floor to stabilize yourself as you move or as you stop? Or could you stop in one phase of the movement and then resume and then stop and then resume? So you're playing that game that kids play, that red light, green light. Do you remember that? So that you can go forward and backward and backward and forward at any moment and any time. And let it go and take a rest. And notice if you feel a little bit more freedom to breathe as you rest, as if maybe your ribs are expanding more. And just noticing how things could change because they've demonstrated that this interesting property of these neural maps is that they change shape, they change size, they change organization over time, and these changes correlate with changes in the way we move and perceive and think and believe. So let me talk about that for a moment. The prefrontal cortex is where we make moral choices. And they did these studies with people who were on death row because they had committed horrific crimes. And when they asked them questions that required moral decision making, nothing was firing in that area of the brain. And by contrast, when they did studies of people who were longtime meditators, they did an extensive amount of studies with people like the Dalai Lama and people who were Buddhist meditators, who were lifelong practitioners. And they found that those people who had been meditating for that long and working with awareness and mindfulness for that long, they could intentionally light up areas of the brain that were only just barely available to people who were beginning meditators or who didn't meditate at all, but definitely those areas related to moral choices, and um, they were hugely lit up in these people. So what we do on a regular basis is not just evidence of who we are in terms of character. It's what maps our brain. It's what creates our habits. And so it just makes sense that we make sure that, we're not acting out of compulsive, oblivious behavior. Please come again. And as you find yourself in the starting position again, initiate the movement now with your eyes, with your upper body, and initiate it with your eyes with the intention of reaching as far as you can go to the right side of yourself, so that you're almost on your side, and perhaps your forearm is actually resting all the way up to your elbow on the floor, and then you come back onto your back without using pressure through your foot. And invite this initiation of movement as if you could float yourself into space by distributing the activity throughout your entire body, along your ribs, along your back, visualizing which way each of those vertebrae is turning in turn as you go up and then as you go back down. And then at some point, rest on your side and leave your eyes on the floor to your right as you come back onto your back. And then as like, be gentle with your eyes so that you're going in the direction of this. You're not being rigid. So then as you come back to your side, your eyes are going up towards the ceiling and vice versa. And notice how that feels in your jaw. How does that change the tonus in your neck? Does it make it a little bit less accessible to move with a sense of flow and ease? And then could you switch it up so that you take your eyes with you? Actually, make the movement a little bit smaller so you're not rolling entirely onto or maybe you're rolling on your side and you're almost rolling like a quarter of the way onto your back, but not completely on your back. So stay in that range where you're on your side and then you're rolling a quarter of the way so that your eyes go with you, and then your eyes go up towards the ceiling as your body rolls sideways or back towards your back, and then switch it up. So we're intentionally changing up, mixing up the pattern. So take your eyes the opposite direction as you roll a quarter of the way. Take your eyes the opposite direction as you do this 2 or 3 times, and then take your eyes with, and then shift up so that you're pushing through your foot, taking your eyes with. Where do your eyes follow? Do they follow your foot, or do they follow your hand? Do they follow your shoulder? And then switch it up so that your eyes go in the other direction of the direction that you're moving. And how do you define which direction you're actually moving in when you start to realize that you're using your whole self on some level? You're always stabilizing some part of yourself against the floor, against the earth. And then let it go when you're just had enough and you're just not even quite sure what you're doing anymore. Just let it go. Take a complete rest on your back. So the quality of the movement and the perception of how we move through space so that we can walk even into old age without tripping over the smallest curb on the sidewalk. The quality of movement and the perception of a particular body part is determined by the size and the quality of the motor sensory map in the brain. So let's take care of this now before we're 70. Let's map this out really well now, because it makes me so crazy to hear about people who are in their 70s and they trip over something and they break a bone because they, I mean, there's many elements going on there, but the part that we can definitely do something about is, yeah, calcium now, not in 20 years, and mapping out the proprioceptive way we use our feet, the way we use our toes, the way we learn to feel the quality of the ground that we're walking on. Like, is it upright? Is it level? Is it steep? Is it downhill? Is there gravel? Is it slippery? Is there traction, right? Proprioception. And so just notice your breathing. Notice if you feel like you can breathe more fully up, all the way up into the top of your lungs. Notice if your mind is calmer. Notice if there's a quality of mind that is more present, more expansive, more able to sense internal and external environments simultaneously. Like most of us completely are not aware of how our internal environment is our primary environment. And if we're not connected to our internal environment, where will you go if you wear out your body? Where will you live? So just do one final scan. Noticing with your arms and legs long, noticing what's different. Do you feel any changes in the way that do you feel more open in the front of your pelvis? I can never quite put this into words. I always feel this sense of just being more present to the lower abdomen and the area in front of the pelvis. And I believe it's because when we spend a lot of time in sitting, that area is hypercontracted more often than not. And when we do these lessons, oftentimes we open up those muscles of the hip flexors in such a way that it just feels like a greater sense of ease there. And what else did we scan for? I think we started with noticing the position of the head. Is the chin more equidistant to each shoulder? So is the line or the length or the distance between the chin and the left shoulder more similar to the length or distance between the chin and the right shoulder now than it was when you began? And perhaps you can scan your face just to notice if your face feels softer, the muscles around your eyes, your jaws, anything there feels softer. Maybe even the muscles around your ears feel softer. And scanning to notice where there is pressure, where there is more clarity. Is there more clarity about where your shoulder blades are in space? Because the movement that we were doing requires that the scapulae, the shoulder blades, rotate around the ribs much farther forward than we often do if we're not reaching, if we're not using our full range of motion forward in the shoulder. And you know what they say? It's like language. You don't use it, you lose it. Where else do you feel? Maybe you feel more length in your spine and in the muscles of your extensors. So if you scan your low back and notice that perhaps your lumbar spine is closer to the floor, there's greater length in the muscles of the extensors between the top of the pelvis and the base of the skull. And when there's more length in the muscles, there's more space inside your body. That's a feeling I love. Just having more space inside of myself to move, like children have, like the way we were when we were born, when we were little kids, is we didn't have so much of the contraction that we've habitually grown accustomed to as adults. And just noticing Anything else that comes to your attention? How are your elbows and hands resting on the floor now compared to when you began? How are your heels, or actually we looked at the knees and the feet, which way were they pointing? Is there any maybe greater release in the hips? And to take this into other functional movements, in addition to breathing and sensing, could you very slowly come to standing, but so slowly that you actually track how you do that? That will just inevitably slow you down. If your intention is to track how you come to standing, you have to do it more slowly. But ultimately, when you spend time increasing your ability to be mindful and to expand awareness in this way, to really hook into the fact that we are consciousness in living bodies, it becomes easier and easier, and you can track more and more as a whole in one image. So you're mapping your ability to perceive your inner and your external, your inner and your outer environment simultaneously in a way that makes you more present, more aware, more conscious, more safe, not just more safe. That's why I say it's the physical movement is just it's more than a metaphor. It's a concrete experience that has relevance to all these other areas of life. And then take it for a little walk. So you apply this level of attention to something as basic as walking through space, and notice how you do that. Where you feel your weight of your feet. You feel your weight shifting from the heel to the ball of the foot. Do you use your toes? Are you more clear about your feet as you walk, or are they just blocks? Because I'm telling you, if your feet are blocks, you're going to fall over because you're going to be top heavy. 26 bones in the feet. Are you able to really use the way the feet have this capacity to almost to grasp in a way like the hands do? And that's all I've got. So thank you for joining me, and I will be posting this on YouTube under my channel. So you can just look for the YouTube channel, Gabrielle Polin, and it should probably come up. And it's a part of another program that I'm doing called the Trauma Release Method, because as one of the things that happens with trauma and PTSD and stress is, the nervous system gets hyperactivated, and this is such a beautiful way to release that, to relinquish that, and to reset. It's like rebooting the brain and the nervous system so that we can just feel better. So thanks for your attention. And if you'd like, feel free to unmute and say something. If you have any questions, I'm here, but I just wanted to formally end.
Hi again. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to give you some feedback though.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
So I'm not sure that I did it 100% correctly, but I did it. And it, when I was trying to roll, kind of it felt like a modified pencil roll from one side to the other, just kind of a halfway without using my foot as a leverage. I found myself really in activating my chest, my whole torso.
Yes.
And I felt like I was using muscles that I hadn't used before for a long time.
Right.
So
and that's a beautiful thing. So that's another reason to go slowly, because you may actually be sore from using muscles that are smaller than the muscle you usually use, or using them in ways you're not used to. But the other thing that you're pointing to, or you're bringing to the fore, is that this is a lesson that relates somewhat to developmental movement that babies do. Like when you have a new baby, they can't roll over, they don't know how, and they don't know how to push through their feet. So they really do have to learn to roll using their torso, and that's one of the things that we lose. And so in these lessons, we're reversing the aging process to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Well, it felt like it was making me take slightly bigger breaths afterwards. Like it did, like my lungs might have just a millimeter of expanded further than they normally do. I don't know. So anyway,
Excellent. Yes.
felt really good. Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
I live there. I live very, very far away, but it was a joy to do this because, like I said, where I live in a very small, remote location, and there's nothing like this available. So.
I think that the Zoom thing is really awesome, and I'm just going to keep doing it until things change. Actually,
Mhm.
because I don't know what's going on, and nobody does. And
Mhm.
I think on some level this is better for certain reasons. I mean, it's better for the environment. It's
Mhm.
more convenient. Say you don't have to spend as much time. You don't have to. You're already home.
I
Now
don't
you
have to
can just
drive
go
anywhere.
relax, right? And you're
Yeah,
in this great state. You don't have to get on the highway,
yes, that's the best part.
isn't it? Well,
So
thank
thank
you so much.
you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody.